This podcast is part of the No Phony Podcast Network, the home of independent awesomeness.
Welcome back to another episode of On the Road with Jim and Casey. Joining me, as always, James Morganti.
That's right.
And joining us today, author Neil Perry Gordon. How are you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Where are you calling in from?
I live in Park Ridge, New Jersey, which is in Bergen County, just west of Manhattan, in the heart of COVID.
Yeah. How are you holding up during all this?
Well, thank God everybody's well.
Good.
I was talking to my friend up in Alaska yesterday. So the entire state of Alaska, they're shut down. They have a quarantine. They call it hunkering down. They have a hunker in place in Alaska, and there's about 350 cases in the entire state.
Oh my God.
And we have about 800 in our little town of Park Ridge.
Yeah.
So it's remarkably different. Experiences are different. And when he talks to me, it's like, yeah, we're still working, we're still doing stuff. And okay, I'm still in my pajamas. I have been in for 4 weeks.
Yeah, I hear you there, man. So let's see. You grew up you were born in the Bronx, correct?
I was born in the Bronx, lived there till I was 7 years old. And then it was like a moment when Dorothy went from the black and white to the color. We moved to the suburbs and up to Rockland County, which is just up the road from here. And as a kid at 7, I was in the country. And that was a wonderful moment.
You like that better? You like country living better than city life?
Well, I'm still close to the city. But, it was funny. I was thinking back in the 60s when we first did that, there was a big exodus from the city. Back then, everyone was moving out to the suburbs. That was when the suburbs burst into popularity. And then all of a sudden, recently everyone's been moving back into the cities again. I think after what's going on now, we're going to see another sudden resurgence of people leaving the cities, especially now, we could do Zoom calls and things like that. You don't need to have that densely populated, situation as we used to. So, cities are. So I think we're going to start seeing this exodus from the cities to suburban and urban and rural type living. Yeah.
End times, man. End times. Always the cities is where all the disease spreads. You gotta get out in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's where we're headed. This is the next stop is like Vermont or upstate New York. So,
so I read you were moving out in the suburbs. You were graduated from the first high school class of Green Meadow, Waldorf, right?
That's right. Does that mean something to you?
No, I'm just reading. It was just in your biography.
Yeah. Well, Green Meadow Waldorf Waldorf School is a school of, there's many in the world. It was started by Rudolf Steiner. And there's a lot of Waldorf schools all throughout the world. And we were the first 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So we carried the high school through, and it's still there, still operating, and still graduating seniors.
How big of a class did you have?
12.
Oh, wow.
My graduating class, yeah. It was tiny. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you moved from there to Pace University, where you graduated with a bachelor's degree in marketing, correct?
I did. Yep. I was in Pace, downtown Manhattan, right across the street from City Hall. Lived in the dorm right there. My room had a view of the Brooklyn Bridge, which today would probably cost, how many millions to have such a view. But yeah, I was down in New York City for lots of years. And back then, when I was down in Lower Manhattan, at night, people went home. There was no residential communities in Wall Street area. But today, it's all different. Today there's lots of condos going up all the way downtown and all throughout Wall Street. But back then, after 6 o'clock, it was a ghost town. So we used to take the subway up to the Village.
Wow.
Yeah. So
then after that, how long were you in New York then? After you graduated?
I was in New York for about 2-3 years in school there, and I graduated. Then I actually ended up moving down to Florida for 10 years. Lived down there. That's where I met my my ex down there, and have 2 boys, Sam and Max. Sam is now, he's 31, Max is 26. And I just brought Max up to Vermont a couple of weeks ago. He got a job on a farm up in Vermont, organic farm. So he's in a nice, safe spot. I'm very happy that he's up there. Yeah.
Very cool. So when you went to Florida, you started a drapery business?
Yeah, I'm still in the drapery business. And I'm not making a living yet selling books, but yeah, I've been in the drapery business over 30 years. Drapery and upholstery, and that's where I learned it, down in Florida, and I'm still doing it today in New York City.
And you've actually written 2 trade books on drapery, correct?
Yeah, well, I wrote a book. My first book I wrote was called The Designer's Coach. That was a coaching book for people in the design industry, coaching their business. And then I wrote a book called An Architect's Guide to Engineered Shading Solutions, which was a book for architects on advanced type of shading solutions. So I wrote 2 trade books. And I use those mostly for marketing my business. And then I became a writer of historical fiction in 2018.
What can you tell us about, it says that you founded InSync Solar. What can you tell us about that?
InSync Solar is a window covering business. So, I coined the term engineered shading solutions. So it's a way of reducing stress onto building systems by using window coverings. So solar is, the biggest stress on any building is there's too much energy coming through the windows, because now that all these big buildings are going up with full glass facades. So you want to cut out the energy entering the space, and the one good way of doing that is with window coverings. So that's one of the things I speak about. I do a lot of lunch and learns for architects. But recently, I've been doing a lot of webinars, online webinars for architects across the country. In normal times, if we ever get back to it, I go out and I do lunch and learns. I buy lunch, sit and get into an architect's office, and I speak to about 30, 40 architects and give them an education on engineered shading solutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then what made you decide to want to start writing about historical fiction?
Well, I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories, and I've always wanted to do that. It was always something that was, a part of me. I think deep down, I always thought that it would be something enjoyable. And I took a course, an online writing course. It really wasn't very good, but it gave me something. It gave me, it ignited a flame inside me and encouraged me to start writing. And I haven't stopped since. So I've published 4 novels since I began back in 2018. I have a 5th coming out in about 2 months. And I have a 6th I just finished the first draft on. So I've been writing furiously since 2018.
What made you, I'm just reading like the bios on, like, I just got the Righteous one right here. And I dig people that watch the show, I love theology, metaphysics, ancient text, mystical things. And
oh yeah, you like this book.
What made you get into that? Like, are you into that stuff too? Are you into all the?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this is called. All my books are historical fiction, but this is metaphysical fiction, and it's about the journey of the consciousness when we pass. Does the consciousness still live on? And how can we get in touch with the consciousness while we're still in our human form, in our human body? And in the book, it's done through dreams, through lucid dreams. And I wrote the book right after my father passed away, and I was curious about the concept of what happens to the consciousness once we're done with the body. And there's lots of articles. I've actually wrote a story, an article that was picked up called "Journey of the Consciousness," and I just explored that whole idea of what happens to our mind. I mean, our body is just a vehicle. What brings us from place to place, but the consciousness lives on. So that's the little taste of what that story's about.
Energy, the energy will always be there, right? Yeah,
the consciousness is just a continuum and never dies.
And what got you into that? What books have you read on that stuff? I've read some texts Apocrypha, and some of the Essene texts and the Pistis Sophia, talking about, obviously afterlife stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I love Jesus Christ too. I know the Bible really well. And so like, I'm all about like that stuff. And like, I love the character names too. Solomon and Myron and Rasha. And it's just very ancient sounding.
Yeah. Well, interesting. This is Jewish Kabbalah mysticism is where I got my inspiration from.
Have you read the whole Kabbalah? Or
I've studied it, and I do, and the book does bring a lot of points about Kabbalah in it. So it's Kabbalic wisdom that's talked about, and that's one of my, because I have the Rasha and the Tzaddik. So the Tzaddik, and my first book too, A Kabbalah's Tale, introduced the Tzaddik, which are 36 humans that are put on the earth by God to have the hand of God, and 36 only exist on the world at any one time. So my first book, I have Moshe. He's a tzaddik, but he's only a child. In the righteous one, it's book 2. He's now 60 years old, and he still has the touch, but he hasn't really used it in all those years. But he's sought out by some people who need his skill, who know he exists, who knows that tzaddik exists, because now the Rasha, which is the evil counterpart to the tzaddik, has made himself known. So it's the battle between the tzaddik and the Rasha in this book, between good and evil, between light and dark, which tells the story.
so you do. I mean, yeah, like in ways there is. I know a lot of people believe no, there is no right or wrong. There's nothing. It's all meant to be, and this, that, and the other. Which I get that philosophy for sure. I mean, like. Sometimes we even can't judge or discern what is right or wrong. But in the ancients, it's like, no, this is right, and this is wrong. Like there's good, and then there's evil. And are you kind of like on that realm of like this realm of living of where we're at right now is like a test?
Yeah, well, people do talk about that, and this whole idea about karma, that this is, we're on this life to improve, and that's part of what the Kabbalah is about. So, you evolve over your lifetimes until you get to a certain point where you finally reach this highest state, and then you don't reincarnate any longer. You've reached that place. So, yeah, that's the whole thing about Kabbalic wisdom, of keep improving upon your life, your next life. And it's nice to believe it. I don't, who knows what it's all about. But especially these times, you wonder, as people are quickly passing through, what do they leave behind?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think belief is the most important thing. I think that's why they said it in the past. And you can call it energy. You can call it the source. You can call it forethought. You can call it afterthought, whatever God you want to call God. They called it God, but I'm just saying, like, call it whatever but like, I like calling it what the ancients called it.
Right.
Because whether or not they had that, why there was something literally here that they saw, and even Kabbalah, it came from the clouds. Like something came down in every belief and said to everyone, hey, do this, don't do that. You know what I mean? Like we were told moralities and we were told what to do. Like morality wasn't like, oh, wait, if I don't kill that guy, that's good. Like we can't figure that out. We had to be told that.
Yeah. And that's why it makes you think that consciousness does live on from soul to soul. Well, you should read The Righteous One. It sounds like it'd be your cup of tea.
I'm all about this stuff. I really think, I was just telling Casey, I always have like my own feelings on where we're going. And I'm like, I really think like this whole system, solar system, is like and I think Saturn is like the ruling, because they used to worship Saturn big time. I mean, that's why that was the Sabbath day, Saturday, Saturn, of all the ancients. And like, that was Kronos, and Father Time, Mother Earth, Father Time, plowing Mother Earth. But we have, I always feel like, I wonder if we ever get past this level or whatever this is and go to the next one, if it's like out of this star system, and we just have the free universe to go basically live in freedom and create and do whatever we want.
Yeah, well, you're almost talking about what indigenous life is like, you know, the indigenous people who were in tune with nature, in tune with the moon and the stars, and live their life, you know, as part of the earth, not as owners of the earth. And you should read my book, Moonflower, then. That's about indigenous.
Yeah, who's
story.
I saw the name, the book of, or the 7 books of Lucas.
Yes, so that's about a young boy that in the mid to late 1600s in New Amsterdam, which was New York, which became New York. When the Dutch controlled New York, it was called New Amsterdam. And he ends up living with a native population in upstate New York in a place called Beverwyck, which is now Albany. He lives on he goes on a rite of passage quest, and he ends up with a shaman, and the shaman gives him what's called the moonflower, which is a plant that's called datura. You might have heard of datura. It grows everywhere, and especially up in the Northeast. And it has seeds, and if you take the seeds, it's hallucinogenic. So, but under the guidance of a shaman, he takes the seeds, and he's told before he does to write down his entire life, from everything he can remember, from the time he was born to the time till yesterday. He's 17 years old, and this will be his document he has, because after he takes this moonflower, this datura, he will lose his memory. And the only thing he will have is this document that tells him what his life was up to that point. But any emotional connection to his past is gone. It's all just all those words written on parchment.
Wow.
So that's how the book begins, and he goes on this journey.
What would you even write? Like, what would you want to tell yourself who you are?
Right.
And you want that to.
If someone said to you, okay, Jim, you're going to take these seeds, I'm going to give you this, you're going to drink this, and when you wake up, you're not going to remember anything about who you are. But before you do that, write down everything you know about your life up to that point.
You know, I feel that's something that, like, you should do, like, in your, just like, because when time goes by in our own lives, sometimes we forget where our mind was. Do you know what I mean? And, like, it's almost like how they say to write backwards, right? Like, you've already done everything and you're an old man, and then what you're doing and what you've done and whatever, and to, like, manifest stuff. But, like, this is like, I never thought about writing to myself about who I am, and, like, to explain, oh, I love people, and I like being nice and getting weird and talking about ancient conspiracy occult stuff.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, though you may write all these things down, it's not, you don't have that same connection if you don't have the memory of it. You know, it's that
Right.
emotion is gone. So there's a big part of it missing, and all it is just words. It could be anybody's words at that point. But that's what he has to try to, that's what he battles through during the story. So it begins that way. And you have this, you know, in indigenous culture, the number 7 is very important. It's also in Kabbalah, 7 is important. So the 7 books is a lot of different versions of 7 he needs to go through as he goes on this journey. And that's my second book, called Moonflower. So we have a Cobbler's Tale, we have Moonflower, the Righteous One, and then my newest one is the Bomb Squad.
Right. And
can you explain what you mean by historical fiction? Like,
well, it's a genre. Historical fiction. I go to a period of time. Well, the way I come up with my ideas for my stories, I'll pick a story idea in a time period, and I basically work with ideas of characters first. I'll get an idea of where I want these characters to end up, and then once I have an idea of who they are and what point of history they're at, then I'll look up historical events and see what happened at that time and try to tie that into my story as backdrop, mostly. And that's how I think historical fiction is created. It's just tying in historical events around fictional stories. It just makes history a little bit more easy to digest for a lot of people. If you ever read a Ken Follett novel, you know, he's a master at it. he takes his manuscript before they're published and gives them to historians for accuracy, to make sure that the story he's telling is still accurate, yet he's still working with fictional characters, but he may bring in a Winston Churchill or somebody like that to as part of the story, but not as the main character, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you think historical fiction, like, I wonder if it's kind of like futurist?
Yeah,
fantasy.
in a way, it's just, it could be future or dystopian. The thing with working into the future is like you don't have an event of history to document.
Right.
So you're a little bit freer in your imagination, where I have to try to tie in, say, oh, that's a great idea. I should use this idea in the story, but I realize, oh no, it doesn't happen till the following year, so I really can't use it.
Right.
So I try to stay true to the history in terms of the time.
What's funny is, like 1984 or sci-fi futurist books, a lot of times they come true in different ways, right? I wonder if that's the same for historical fiction, where when you're writing about something that maybe something like that happened and caused all these other things to happen, because you're kind of looking at things coming from the future, I mean, in an infinite way, and anything was possible back then. I mean, they were probably into it as well, into all the mysticism and the Kabbalah and all that. So obviously they were, because you're in the 1600s and Kabbalah is much older. But I wonder if that's like similar too, that like how we can look at stuff now and be like, wow, this is like, you compare it to the future of stuff. And I wonder if that's
Stephen King wrote a book about, I think it was called JFK, about time travel. And so he was able to go back in time and try to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the book, the character who's trying to stop it kept running into obstacles where other characters try to stop him from changing history. So it was this force that wouldn't allow him to do this. So it sort of made you think that, yeah, there's a continuum in time, and things happen the way they're supposed to happen. You can't just go back and change it. Things are, if it happened, it's going to continue to happen that way. So it was an interesting take, because most people think time travel, I'll go back and change history. No, it wasn't so easy to do.
Yeah, I dig the philosophy behind it too, of everything, and how to look at things from more than a one-dimensional viewpoint. So tell me about the bomb squad here, because this looks like it's up. Is it more up to like more recent times, or is this still?
No, the bomb squad takes place in 1916. It begins with the explosion of an armaments depot on Black Tom Island, July 31st, 1916, and it was done by German spies. Germany, when the war started, the United States was not in the war for a little bit of time. So there was a lot of Germans that came here, and they actually got stuck here because there was a blockade of any ships going back. So all along the Jersey coast, the thousands of Germans, nationalists, who were stuck here during the war, and they were basically our enemy, or were about to be our enemy. So Germany was hell-bent on trying to distract America from entering the war, because it's quite a big force, and they were trying to distract us. So they were actually blowing things up along the eastern seaboard right before we entered the war, which actually had the opposite effect and got us into the war. But the bomb squad's about two people, I call the Clash of the Patriots. It's about two men, both German-American. One is still loyal to the fatherland. Him and his father, who's actually a dealer in lethal weapons and was a lifelong friend of Kaiser Wilhelm, are here in the States and here in the New York metropolitan area, hell-bent on stopping America, distracting America from getting into war. At the same time, I have Detective Max Rothman, also a German, but a German-American, but loyal to America. And he has been recruited to stop the Germans from blowing things up and find out what's going on, who's behind this espionage that's going on. So he recruits four other men, each with a unique skill, to create the bomb squad. And the story is about these two men, each at odds, trying to, they both believe in their cause, both believe they're right. He believes that, growing up, Dr. Schwartz, who was actually a doctor of Ellis Island Immigrant Hospital and the German spy, he believes in his cause. And he believes he's right, just as Max Rothman, the New York City police detective, believes that he's right. So it's a battle between these two men. And it takes place here in the New York metropolitan area. And it actually travels over to Berlin during the epicenter of Germany and the source of its power. And it's a tale of a New York City police detective fighting a doctor of the head administrator of Ellis Island Hospital and a German spy. And it's an adventure tale. It's a crime story. In fact, I just got mentioned the #1 crime story for April 2020 on quite a big list with other renowned writers, like Don Winslow was on the list with his new book, and so was I, right along with him. So that was
that's great, man.
Yeah.
Now, when you, I really love what you said. They both think they're right, and I was having a conversation with somebody a while back, and I was like, you can. Like, when two people both think they're right, I think in a free place, like, go ahead. Yeah, you can both be right. Like, believe what you want. You know what I mean? And I guess when it comes down to bare bones fighting, it's who wants it more. But obviously, there's going to be a winner and a loser. But, like, I think when everyone thinks they're right in their way, you could have a German nationalist or an American nationalist. Hey, well then great, be nationalist. If you're not a nationalist, okay, that's great too. You don't want to be you know what I mean? Like, I kind of think everything can exist all at once.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have political parties who have major differences. We have, countries that go at war. You have patriots on both sides who think they're in the right. And that's why many times we end up having wars, because each side thinks they're right and, and wants to pursue their agenda.
Is there a way to let people just do whatever they want and not care about what they do, and just, as long as you don't kill somebody and get in their way and do bad thing, like the basic commandments? It's all you gotta listen to. Just don't do that. Do whatever you want. You can believe in Satan, you can believe in Zulu, the Pleiades, you can believe in whoever. But I just said on the other show, God lets Satan roam. Like, two people of totally opposite person. Well, God's obviously above, but or in my belief, but in the word, he lets this evil person that's just deceiving everyone roam. He lets him roam. So I look at it like, if I disagree with somebody so much, which luckily for me, I'm never angry. I don't know why, but I'm passionate. Yeah, but I don't get mad at people. But God lets the devil roam. So if everyone thinks that way, I could think you're the devil, you could think I'm the devil. Just think well, hey, wait a minute. God lets the devil roam. So if I'm trying to be godly, and because the source, the thing that we're trying to get to, I would let you do whatever you want to do and believe your belief,
Right. Well, as long as one doesn't cause harm to someone else.
And as long as you're obeying the commandments. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's always the idea of having utopia. And it also sounds like, if you ever watch Star Trek, it sounds like a good Star Trek episode. They go to a planet, and it's exactly what you said. And, of course, someone screws it all up and
right.
causes a fuss over something.
So now, are you Jewish? Are you?
I am.
What type are you?
Well, I mean, I grew up as a synagogue that we went to was considered conservative, today's standards. Today, I would probably be more drawn to more of reform. So yeah, I grew up that way. But it was interesting that when I went back, when I wrote my first book, A Cobbler's Tale, it was about my great-grandfather who immigrated here from Poland in 1910. And he came here on his own first, left back in Poland, his pregnant wife and 3 children. One of the kids was my grandfather. And he came here, tried to get established. He was a cobbler, therefore a cobbler's tale. So he wanted to get himself established here in America. And they lived in a shtetl, which was a Jewish community in Poland. And back then, pretty much there were all types, there was no types of Jews. Everyone was the same. You had the Torah scholars, who were the most revered young men in the village, who were the best students, who were the smartest, the intellectuals, who all they had to do was just study the Torah. Then if you weren't as skilled, or if your father had a profession, you became either cobbler or a butcher or a baker or or you sewed, made clothes. So there was different types. And then when they came here, all of a sudden the tables turned. All of a sudden those intellectuals had nothing to do here. They had no skills that were marketable. And it was the cobbler and it was the butcher and the baker who was able to make a living here. And so they brought the religion here, of course. They brought the Judaism here to live, and it was very important when they first came here to have their synagogues, and also very, very important to have their places of burial, which was to them back then, it was more important of where you were buried and how you were remembered, and more so than today. Like back then, people would go for picnics to visit relatives regularly at the cemetery, weekly. And grandparents would say to the grandchildren, make sure you come and visit me when I'm buried. You have to promise you're going to come. And that was the way life was. But things changed. Everyone becomes more secular as time moved on. And then today we have a variety of different types of Jews, from very Reformed to ultra Orthodox. So yeah, it's become very segmented over the past 100 years.
What is the lineage, a Jew that studies the Kabbalah? What are they called? What kind of, is it just Kabbalistic Jew, or?
Yeah, well, the Kabbalah for many years was mystic, was kept as a secret. It started in the city of Safed, and in the righteous one, I explain the history of too. So Safed was where the Kabbalists were. And they studied it, and there was this whole idea of a lifestyle by following this certain types of mysticism that they believed in. Today it's become popular, very popular. Madonna was into Kabbalah and became a celebrity thing.
A lot of science came from that too. The scientists were into that.
Yeah, well, it's a way of life. It's a way of thinking of things. It's a way of putting things in perspective. It's helpful with that. Now,
I read, did it come to this? So was it orally passed down that through there was 77 rabbis that were that when Moses went to the mountain to get to talk to God, when the fire came down, again, coming down from through the clouds, they also, but it came from the 77 rabbis that were at the bottom of the mountain explaining what was happening.
I think one thing about Judaism is that they have a good written history of that. I don't know at that point what was written down, but I do know when I went to Israel, and actually it was when I visited Egypt, they found in some of the old synagogues in Egypt rooms where, because what happened was, in the Jewish tradition, anything that was written could never be thrown away. You had to put it in a room. So they kept a room, they had a slot. So instead of crumbling up and throw in the waste can, you would put it through the slot and hit it in this room. So no one knew the room was there. All of a sudden they discovered the room, opened it up, and all these little manuscripts, these documents were there. It was like a treasure trove of all cool types of things. So yeah, Jews find that writing things down and keeping a record of things have always been really important. And when you hear stories like that, it actually just, it shows you it really did happen.
Do you speak ancient Hebrew?
Well, Hebrew is an ancient language, and there's two versions of Hebrew. There's the modern Hebrew and there's the ancient Hebrew. The modern Hebrew was brought back when Israel became a state in 1948, and they decided to make Hebrew the official language. I mean, it could have been Yiddish, because that was the Jewish language of Eastern Europe. That was the home language, but they sort of modernized the Hebrew, and that's been the language of the Israelis. I learned Hebrew when I was a kid at Hebrew school. Not that I actually know more Yiddish these days than I know Hebrew, because Yiddish is a lot more fun in terms of knowing speaking that language or the words than it is than Hebrew is. But Hebrew is not a hard language to learn. You would have to be immersed in it, of course, any language. But I think it's from what I hear from people who have went to Israel, it's not that difficult to learn.
I play. I'm a musician, and I used to play with. I was before this whole thing stuff. But I used to play in Manhattan a lot with a friend of mine. They're all Jewish from Russia. Where was she at in Russia? Ada Pasternak, her name is. She lives in Connecticut, and I would play with her, and her families. They're amazing. They're the most wonderful people, and when I would rehearse with them, they would practice Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, speaking together. And it was so cool because, like, to me, like when I studied biblical text, I didn't read, because we got it translated out of how many Greek. Even if you're doing King James, it's out of the New Testament was in Greek, and then the ancient was translated out of Hebrew. When you read the Hebrew translation of it, it's like, man, it's you want to talk about Star Trek? It's like the wildest. I'm saying, like, fallen angels, and it's the wildest story of like aliens and interbreeding and trying to keep races, trying to stay, okay, let's try to keep humans here. You know what I mean? Like, I love it.
Awesome. I wanted to tell your audience, your listeners, that I have a special offer for them.
Okay. Oh, okay. Let's go ahead.
For my book. So, one of the keys to selling books online, which is really basic, well, certainly all the bookstores are now closed anyway. So the only place to buy a book today is really online. So the best way to sell a book online is to have good reviews. So I'm always interested in getting a lot of reviews for my book. Of course, the more stars, the better. So what I like to offer your audience, your listeners, is a free download of my new book, The Bomb Squad. If they send me an email, I will send them a PDF of the book. They could download it, read it for free. And all I ask for them is, if they like it, please leave a review for me on Amazon. So that would be something that I can get out of it, something everyone could get the book at no charge. And we're happy to do that. And I could just share my email with them.
Absolutely.
It's neilperrygordon@gmail.com. And I'll spell it because everyone spells Neil differently. It's Neil, Perry, Perry, Gordon, Gordon @gmail.com. So you send me an email, I'll be happy to return to you with a PDF of the book.
Great, man. And I'll be sure to put that on the screen too for everyone to see also. So one more question before we wrap up. Are you big, like your books are historical fiction, but you obviously use a lot of actual facts from history. Are you a big historian? Or how do you go about researching to do one of your books, being that you do use a lot of the history and stuff?
I say thank God for Google.
Yeah.
Because if I hadn't have Google, I had to go to the library. If I did this 20 years ago and I had to use a typewriter and go to the library, I would never have been a writer. There's no way. Way too hard.
Yeah.
That fact that I could type on my laptop and I got Google at my fingertips, life is a breeze when you be a writer. Someone's asked me the other day, how come you didn't do this 20 years ago? That's exactly why I didn't, because it was like,
Yeah.
it would have been like chopping a tree with a baseball bat. It was kind of challenging. But people did it. Everyone did it. I mean, lots of writers back then, they all did it.
Yeah, that's the way you had to do it. So like, what's your writing process? Like, if you get an idea, I always think, I'm a big fan of Chevy Chase, and I always think back to Funny Farm when he buys the place out in the woods, and he goes there to write his famous novel, and then he sits down at the typewriter and he just has no ideas. So like, what's like, do you get an idea and then sit down and write it down right away, or do you sit down like that and try to come up with something? Or
it's like I say it like this. My writing process is like I take a clump of clay, I throw it down on the wheel, and I start making something. And what I'm working with is words instead of clay, and I'm molding my story. I'll have an idea of my characters. I'll have an idea of the gist of the story. I'll know where it's going to end up, but I have no idea how I'm going to get there. It's an organic way of writing. I don't write with an outline. But I tell myself the story. I write what I want to read. I write what I like to write about. I like what I like to read about. So if I want to read about some boy taking some moonflower and, losing his mind, losing his memory and having to live a life, because that's basically how that story began, with that gist of that idea. And then everything that came from it was just as I wrote it, just an unrolling a carpet down the hallway. That's how the story develops. And I also think it's good because if I'm surprising myself, I'm also surprising the reader. And the readers like surprises. Readers like conflicts. The readers like twists and turns. The reader likes to be entertained. No one likes to be bored. So that's why I write that way. And also that's the way I find I'm able to write. And I've done now, so this is 2020. So in this summer will be in my 18, 19, 12, will be 3 years that I'm writing, and I have 5 books and a 6th on its way. So I think it works, the process.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And just tell us one more time before we wrap up, your website and where everybody can find your books and stuff.
Well, you can go on to Amazon to find my books. It's Neil Perry Gordon. You can go to my website, which is neilperrygordon.com. And it's a great website, lots of information there. And my email is neilperrygordon@gmail.com. So I think it's pretty easy to find me.
All right, man. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll post all those links and try to get you some reviews.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You bet.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.